Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Quick glance, what's in the package? Here it is. $620 billion to rebuild roads, bridges, and highways. $400 billion on home care for the elderly and disabled. $174 billion in tax incentives for sales of electric vehicles. $650 billion on electric grid improvements, broadband, water systems, on and on and on it goes. The Washington Post crunched the numbers. We crunch the numbers. We find that 5.5% of the $2 trillion, well, 5.6 of the $2 trillion proposal is only dedicated to roads and bridges. Why is that?
Well, we're talking about roads and bridges. We're talking about rail and transit. We're talking about airports and ports. As you mentioned, we're talking about things like the grid. I don't know why anybody would say it's a mistake to invest in the grid after what we just witnessed in Texas. We saw U.S. citizens living in Texas melting snow in their bathtubs to be able to flush their toilets in the United States of America. That is unacceptable. So yes, infrastructure includes energy infrastructure. You know what else is part of infrastructure now? Broadband. I'm proud of the fact, even though it's a little outside my lane on the transportation side, I'm proud of the fact that we're going to finally get broadband out to every American, because we know, especially in rural areas, how much that's cutting people off from opportunity. Good infrastructure planning is always about looking to the future. You know, railroads weren't part of infrastructure until we built them. You know, I'm sure in the Eisenhower area, they weren't thinking about things like broadband. They were still working on electrification, which would have sounded newfangled in its time. Now it's time to prepare for the future. And the millions of jobs that will be created by this bill are because this bill looks to the future.
Let's talk about the job creation part of this, because during the Obama administration, the shovel-ready jobs, they weren't there. At the beginning of this administration, John Kerry, the climate czar, told people that worked on the Keystone Pipeline that they could just go and get a solar job. Here's a coal miner from Fox and Friends. He was on earlier today talking about what it means to him.
My main concern more than anything is what's going to happen to the people who live here. Are we going to put wind and solar farms here in West Virginia that we can replace all those coal jobs? When you have an administration who says we're going to eliminate those jobs, it hurts, and you start to look for other opportunities outside of that area, hopefully something that can grow, and honestly, we're just not seeing that around here.
If this bill does pass, like, when do you think those jobs would materialize?
Well, as you know, that's a great example. You know, coal jobs went down under the Trump administration. We got to have a better plan for the future of coal communities, and the president has directed us to be very intentional about that. So that's why this bill includes provisions to make sure there are jobs in things like reclaiming mines, or we know that there are a lot of areas where we've got wells that have to be capped. That's going to require skilled work, union work, and I think those kinds of jobs are among the millions of jobs that are being created. But let's be clear. There are jobs being created as we speak right this minute in things like the American auto industry, increasingly positioning itself to lead the way on electric vehicles, which is great, because I want the electric vehicles of the future to be built in America. I want America to be leading that, not China or our other competitors, which means, again, we've got to make those investments.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that point. I think over the last 6 months, last 12 months, we've spent $6 trillion. This is part A of a two-part plan. I don't know how big the second part of the plan is. I mean, maybe you can tell us today, but when does the spending stop?
Well, look, as a percentage of GDP, we're kind of short of our competitors in terms of what we invest. But one of the things I admire about the president's plan is it's fully paid for. And I think that's an important feature of the plan. You know, right now, we've got to make sure we're making smart investments for the future. And what's abundantly clear is that this policy we've had in the past of shortchanging our infrastructure, that's catching up to us. Anytime your car hits a hole in the road, you're paying for that. Anytime a bridge collapses in America, we're all paying for that. We can invest now, or we can pay the price later.
Mr.
I'd rather invest now.
I did want to ask you one last thing. You're going to have the first cabinet meeting today over at the White House. I know you're probably glad that you'll be having a chance to get together in person. I'm assuming the EPA administrator will be there. One of the reasons these infrastructure projects always get slowed down or get canceled is because the environmental groups file lawsuit after lawsuit, and there's the NEPA regulations. That sounds a little technical. It's a government thing, but there's got to be some sort of reform when it comes to that, so that you can allow projects to actually go forward. Will you talk to the EPA administrator about that?
Yeah, that's actually another thing that's mentioned in this plan, making sure that we have an effective permitting process, because that can add to the cost and the complexity of processes. I saw that as mayor. But let's be clear. The number one reason infrastructure projects don't get done in this country is because they're not funded. And that's what this plan is going to take care of.
Yesterday, the president said he's going to bring Republicans into the Oval Office. It was 2 months ago today, February 1st, where 10 Republicans, moderates you could call them, went to the Oval Office to do a deal with the new president, and they came away with nothing. It is almost as if they were been there, done that. If that's the reality now, how many Republicans vote with you? Any?
Well, we really want to have Republican support on this plan. That's why there have already been 2 Oval Office meetings with Republican and Democratic leaders, one from the House, one from the Senate, and I think we can expect more from that in the future. Now, in the end, whether they decide to support this plan is up to them, but we're going to do everything we can to earn that support, and the president has said he welcomes ideas on any dimension of this. I'm on the phone every day talking to members of both parties, seeing what they think, seeing what they like, seeing where the concerns are, and since infrastructure really is a bipartisan priority among the American people, we'd love nothing more than to have a bipartisan vote on that here in Washington.
All right.
Thanks,
Secretary.
thanks for coming on. We got a million questions. I mean, when it's 2.3 trillion, yeah, that's the way it goes. But thanks for your time.
Let us thank the heavens for Biden not sending Pete Buttigieg to China as the US ambassador. That Pete is the transportation secretary and the frontman and the explainer-in-chief who will take Biden's infrastructure bill to the people in the country. Any legislative bill to pass through needs a two-front approach. One designed specifically for Washington to get the votes in the Congress and the Senate, and the other to convince the people of the country that we need this bill. And it is extremely important, the second part. And on a bill that can be transformational, such as this one, the infrastructure bill, you will never be able to pass it unless there is buy-in from the people of the country. This is not a gun control bill over which Washington freezes automatically, despite overwhelming support from voters in the country. But this is an infrastructure bill that everyone for a very long time agree that the country badly needs it, but differ on how it should be done. Biden will not get his 50 votes if people are clueless about what the bill is trying to do and how it will help everyone over time. The Republican strategy over the bill is already clear. Senator Roy Blunt recently said that only 30% of the bill is focused on infrastructure, especially on the spending front. And in the Fox interview you just saw, the host said that only 5.6% of spending goes into infrastructure. Biden administration has indeed expanded the definition of what infrastructure is, and if they want to go ahead and get this done, then they should also own the responsibility to educate everyone why we need to expand the traditional definition of infrastructure. It is a difficult task, I agree, but one that can be done if you are ready to do the hard yards, which Pete Buttigieg did wonderfully, explaining why it is not acceptable to have Texans boiling snow to flush their toilets, how broadband may not be something that Eisenhower administration would have thought about in the 1950s, but we have to, and why we need to spend if we want the United States to be leading the transition towards electric vehicles instead of allowing China to take the lead. He reframed the conversation to one about competitiveness and the future of the nation, while the Fox host tried his best to keep the focus on the spending part of the bill. It is a smart move for Pete Buttigieg to go on Fox News and explain the bill. He has the gift, the ability to even convince the opponent that there is another way to look at things, and he can do that without being confrontational or coming out as a lecturer. And Biden will need plenty of that to see this bill through. Thanks for watching. If you like it, please do subscribe.